At 62 years old, the sound I enjoy most is the waves crashing against the rocks at dawn, not the screech of car tires slamming to a halt in front of my yard. I left the watering can next to the bougainvilleas and wiped my hands on my apron. My son, Spencer, climbed out of the driver's seat with a tense smile, followed by his new wife, Sloane. I hadn't received a phone call or a text, just 3 massive suitcases rolling up the stone path to my door. "Mom, surprise," Spencer muttered, avoiding my gaze as he gave me a quick hug. Sloane didn't even fake the enthusiasm of a family visit. Her eyes were already evaluating the facade, the large windows, and the wooden balcony. "It's bigger than you described, Spence," she commented, walking right past me toward the front entrance. Spencer reached into his pocket and pulled out a copy of my house key. A key I had given him years ago, strictly for emergencies. He handed it to Sloane with a clumsy gesture. "From now on, she's going to take care of everything," he announced, trying to sound confident. "The shopping, the maintenance, your routine. You've worked hard. Mom, you need to rest." I watched the small brass key disappear into Sloane's designer handbag. My pulse didn't quicken. There were no tears of disappointment or shouts of indignation in my throat. I smiled. I didn't say a word. "I'll get the guest room ready," I offered in a calm voice, turning toward the kitchen. "Oh, don't worry about it, Hazel," Sloane replied from the hallway, dragging her heaviest suitcase. "We'll stay in the master bedroom. It gets better natural light for my mornings. And you'll be more comfortable in the downstairs room. That way, you don't have to climb stairs." Spencer nodded, as if that were a brilliant medical decision. I walked over to the coffee maker, grabbed my favorite mug, and poured the last splash of hot coffee. They had a carefully designed plan to take over my space. What they didn't know was that the rest they were offering me was going to cost them dearly. That same afternoon, the sound of furniture being dragged replaced the usual tranquility of my house. Sloane wasted no time. From the kitchen, I watched as she stacked my gardening books and magazines into a cardboard box in the corner of the living room. "Minimalism brings peace of mind, Hazel," she informed me without looking at me, dusting off the empty coffee table. "Too many objects cause stress. Spencer told me you sometimes forget where you leave things." Spencer was sitting on the couch, typing on his cell phone, completely absorbed. He didn't intervene. "I have a very good memory, Sloane," I replied, taking hold of the cardboard box firmly. I lifted it and walked toward my sewing room. "These are staying with me." She let out a sigh of fake patience, the kind you give a stubborn child. I didn't stop to hear her response. I put my things away safely and went on with my day. However, I didn't ignore the signs. While preparing dinner, I noticed that Sloane had rearranged the plates, thrown out my expired spice jars, and put up a list of cohabitation rules on the refrigerator door. Quiet hours, strict no-salt diets, and a note dictating that the living room television would only be used for documentaries or financial news. After scrubbing the pans, I walked silently down the hallway. The door to my master bedroom was open. My linen sheets had been replaced by dark gray synthetic ones. My nightstand photographs were stacked face down. I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to sleep in the downstairs guest room. I went into my room, gathered my pillows, my photographs, and my small wooden jewelry box. I went downstairs with my belongings and settled into the back room. It was small, yes, but it had a solid oak door with an excellent internal deadbolt. Spencer walked past in the hallway hours later. "I'm glad you accepted the change. Mom, it's for the best." I didn't answer. I simply closed the door while they unpacked their suitcases upstairs. I sat on the bed and opened my ledger. The first phase of their invasion was over. Tomorrow, mine would begin. Dinner was a spectacle of absolute control. Sloane had prepared something she called a detoxifying salad, which consisted mainly of bitter leaves and a flavorless dressing. We sat at the dining room table, the very same table where my late husband and I used to share bottles of wine and long laughs. Spencer ate in silence, shooting nervous glances at me. Sloane, on the other hand, chewed with an upright posture, dominating the space. "Hazel," she began, gently resting her fork on her plate. "I was looking over the electric and water bills. You spend way too much for a single person. Plus, the garden maintenance is a waste. We are going to cancel the gardener. Spencer can do it on Sundays." I looked at my son, Spencer, who had never lifted a shovel in his life and hated getting his hands dirty. Nodded quickly. "Yeah, Mom. We have to save money. My business. Well, we need to optimize our family resources." "Speaking of resources," Sloane interrupted, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. "In order for me to manage everything properly, I'll need access to your primary bank account. And that credit card you gave Spencer for emergencies. I'm going to use it for the weekly shopping. It's more practical." The sheer nerve floated in the air of the room. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order dictated in my own home. They wanted my money, my space, and my autonomy, all wrapped up in the false pretext of filial care. Spencer finally looked me in the eyes. "It's for your own good, Mom, so you don't get stressed out with payments. You're at an age where making mistakes with numbers is dangerous." Chewing slowly on a piece of lettuce, I nodded my head. "I understand perfectly what you're telling me," I replied in a soft voice. Sloane smiled, victorious. She put the notebook away and picked up her glass of water. "I'm glad you're being reasonable. A lot of older people become difficult." I finished my dinner in silence, washed my plate, and retired to my small room. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to waste my energy on useless yelling. The next day, the bank branch opened at 8 in the morning. I would be there at 7:30. I got up at 5 in the morning. The habit of waking up before the sun wasn't something I could shake, nor did I want to. I made my coffee in silence, moving through the dimness of my own kitchen with the familiarity of someone who knows every creak of the wooden floor. While waiting for the water to boil, I heard muffled voices coming from the backyard. Sloane and Spencer were awake. I stepped closer to the cracked window, hidden by the shadow of the curtains. "You have to convince her to sign the transfer deed before Christmas," Sloane whispered, pacing back and forth with her phone in her hand. "If we remodel the ground floor, we can rent it to foreigners during the high season. It would pay off your debts in 6 months." I know," Spencer muttered, scratching his head. "But we can't pressure her too much. It's her house." "It was her house," Sloane corrected coldly. "Now it's a wasted investment. She just needs to get used to the small room. We'll take care of her meals. What more does she want? We'll cover the remodel with the card, and that's it." The steam from the coffee maker began to rise. I stepped away from the window without making a sound. There was no surprise in my chest, only absolute clarity, cold and sharp as glass. They had planned this meticulously. Spencer had racked up debts he couldn't pay, and Sloane had seen me as an elderly widow, docile and easily manipulated. A perfect target. I poured my coffee and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't feel sadness. A mother's love does not mean allowing abuse. My husband left me this house debt-free, the product of 30 years of hard work down at the port. Nobody, not even my own flesh and blood, was going to turn my home into their financial life preserver. I went up to my room, dressed in my navy blue pantsuit, gathered my documents, and slipped out the back door before they came in for breakfast. The morning air was crisp. I started the engine of my old car and headed toward the center of town. I had very specific errands to run. The bank branch was empty first thing in the morning. The manager, a kind man I had known for a decade, saw me immediately. I sat across from his glass desk and handed him my ID. "I want to make some changes to my accounts," I indicated, keeping my tone neutral. In less than 15 minutes, I revoked Spencer's authorization on my main account. I canceled the joint credit card he used for emergencies. Furthermore, I transferred 80% of my savings to a new individual account, protected by joint signatures that only I could physically authorize at the branch. "Is there an issue with theft, Ms. Hazel?" the manager asked, noting the firmness of my requests. "Just a family restructuring," I answered with a slight smile. Leaving the bank, I crossed the street to the hardware store. I bought a high-security padlock for the small garden shed, where I kept the electrical generator and the main control for the water pump. I also stopped by the post office and rented a P.O. box. Starting today, all my bank correspondence, bills, and important documents would arrive there, far away from Sloane's curious hands. I got home shortly after noon. I found Sloane in the living room, holding a tape measure, calculating the space between the window and the wall. "You're late," she reprimanded me without letting go of the tape measure. "Lunch isn't ready. I left the ingredients for you on the kitchen counter." I looked at the bland vegetables on the marble. Then I looked at her. "I have things to do," I replied, walking toward my room. "The kitchen is all yours." "Hazel," she exclaimed, clearly offended by my lack of submission. "We agreed that I would manage and you would cook." I stopped in the hallway, turned my head, and stared right at her. "You took charge of everything, Sloane. That includes your own lunch." I closed my bedroom door, leaving her alone with her tape measure and her frustration. The first move was made. The following morning, while Spencer and Sloane walked along the beach evaluating the areas of opportunity of my property, I called a trusted locksmith. He arrived in his truck before the sun got too hot. I didn't ask him to change the main lock of the house. That would have been an unnecessary scandal, a confrontation they would have used to call me unstable or irrational. Instead, I asked him to install a solid door in the hallway that separated the west wing of the house where my bedroom, the kitchen, and my study were from the guest area and the front door. "An electronic deadbolt in here, Ms. Hazel?" the locksmith asked. Confused? "Yes." With a numeric keypad. "Please." In 2 hours, the job was done. Now, my part of the house was an invisible fortress. They could enter through the front door and go up to the large bedroom they had usurped, but they couldn't access the kitchen, or my study, or my documents without knowing the 4-digit code. Then, I took my car keys from the entryway shelf. Sloane had used my car the night before without asking, leaving it almost empty on gas and with sand on the floor mats. I walked to the garage, popped the hood, and discreetly disconnected the battery. A simple trick I learned from my husband. I put the keys in my pocket and went back inside. At 2 in the afternoon, I heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps echoed in the foyer. "Mom," Spencer called from the other side of the new hallway door. He tried to turn the knob, but it didn't give. I heard the sound of his fingers pushing against the wood. "What is this?" "The door is stuck." I walked over, opened it from the inside, and leaned against the frame. "It's not stuck. It's locked." Sloane appeared behind him, frowning. "Did you put a new lock inside the house? I need to make my smoothies." "Open it." "I'm sorry." "Sloane," I answered calmly. "Since you're redesigning the spaces, I decided to define mine. Access to this area is now private. I shut the wooden door right in Sloane's face, securing the electronic deadbolt with a quick beep. I sat in my rocking chair by the kitchen window and poured myself an iced tea. Outside in the foyer, the murmurs turned into rushed complaints. "She's losing her mind," Sloane hissed. "Leave her. I'm going to the supermarket. I need to buy my supplements and some decent food. Give me your mother's card." I heard Spencer's footsteps and then the sound of the front door closing. I smiled slightly. I enjoyed the afternoon watering my plants and reading a mystery novel that Sloane had tried to throw in the trash. 3 hours later, the silence broke. Spencer knocked on the hallway door, this time with more urgency. "Mom, open up. Please." I got up slowly, smoothing my skirt, and opened the door. Spencer was red, sweating, and Sloane had her arms crossed, wearing a furious expression. They weren't carrying any shopping bags. "The cashier at the supermarket rejected the card," Spencer complained, without a filter. "I called the bank, and they told me my access was revoked." We were terribly embarrassed in front of the whole line. "What did you do?" "I did exactly what Sloane suggested on the first day," I replied, leaning against the wall. "Let her manage. So, starting today, the expenses the two of you generate are on you. My money is for my upkeep, not for yours." Sloane took a step forward. "You can't do that. Spencer has urgent debts. We are family. We were supposed to use that credit to remodel the house and—" I turned toward Sloane, stopping her with my gaze. There was no longer any need for half measures. To remodel my house and rent it to foreigners to pay off my son's debts. I heard it all yesterday morning. Spencer grew pale. Sloane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "I am not a real estate project," I continued, lowering my voice so the words carried more weight. "And I am not your ATM." I closed the door again. The click of the electronic lock sounded like a gunshot in the silent hallway. The next morning dawned heavy, loaded with obvious tension. Without access to the kitchen, Spencer and Sloane had to go out for breakfast in town, paying out of their own meager pockets. I watched them from my window as they walked down the stone path toward the garage. Minutes later, I heard the failed attempts to start my car's engine, a choked, dry sound that repeated over and over again. I went out to the backyard with my cup of coffee, pretending to check the rose bushes. Spencer came up the path, frustrated and with grease stains on his hands. "The car won't start," he said, holding back his anger. "Sloane has an important video call at a coffee shop downtown, and we need to get there." "Where did you leave the toolbox?" "The tools are in my study," I replied without looking at him, snipping a dry leaf with the pruning shears. "And the car doesn't work because I decided so. You do not have permission to use my vehicles." "Mom, please," Spencer pleaded, raising his voice for the first time. "Don't do this to us. We're trying to get ahead. Sloane just wants to organize things so we can all live better. You can't lock yourself in half the house and take everything away from us all at once." I turned to face him. He was my son. I had raised him with effort, but at some point, his moldable character had been absorbed by the greed of others. "I haven't taken anything from you that belongs to you, Spencer. I gave you back the responsibility for your own life. And as for Sloane, she didn't come to organize. She came to rule. That is not going to happen here. We're married." He tried to defend himself. "What's mine is hers." "Exactly." I nodded firmly. "But this house is mine. My money is mine, and I make the rules. If you're in a hurry to get downtown, the bus stops at the corner every half hour." Spencer looked at me in disbelief. He opened his mouth to argue, but closed it slowly. He turned around and walked toward the entrance. That day, They walked under the blazing sun to the bus stop. Sunset brought with it the end of Sloane's patience. At 6 in the evening, I deactivated the electronic deadbolt and walked into the living room. They were sitting on my couch, surrounded by dirty coffee cups and a mess that wasn't mine. They went dead silent when they saw me. I walked straight to the coffee table and left 2 sealed envelopes on the glass. "What is this?" Spencer asked, taking the first one with suspicion. "It is the itemized bill for your week here," I replied in a firm, serene voice. I calculated the use of electricity, water, and the exact cost of the groceries that Sloane threw in the trash on the first day. "Since you manage the finances now, I expect the cash reimbursement tomorrow." Sloane snatched the second envelope and tore it open. She pulled out some color-printed brochures. "The second one," I continued, without altering my posture, "is a list of affordable rental apartments in the neighboring town. They don't require a guarantor. You have until Friday at noon to vacate my house. You can't kick us out," Sloane exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "Spencer is your son." I looked at my son. He was pale, his eyes fixed on the floor, incapable of defending me or defending himself. "I'm not kicking you out," I said, turning back toward my safe hallway. "I'm showing you the exit. You came looking for keys and control. Now you have the opportunity to exercise it under your own roof." I closed the door behind me. The click of the electronic lock was my only answer to their complaints. On Thursday morning, the engine of a taxi broke the silence in front of the yard. There was no drama or yelling, just the harsh sound of 3 heavy suitcases dragging along the stone path to the street. I opened the front door to watch the departure. Sloane got into the car with a tense jaw, ignoring me completely. Spencer stopped for a second in front of the bougainvilleas. His shoulders were slumped. "Mom, I'm sorry," he murmured. It was an empty apology, born of defeat and discomfort, not regret. I looked him straight in the eyes. "Learn to hold your own reins, Spencer. When you're ready to be a son and not an opportunist, this door will be open for a visit, but only for a visit." He nodded awkwardly, got into the taxi, and closed the door. I watched as the vehicle drove away down the coastal highway until it disappeared. I closed my front door and let out a deep sigh, letting go of all the accumulated tension. I walked to my room, tore off the rough gray sheets, and returned my fresh linen sheets to my bed. I organized my photographs, retrieved my gardening books, and brewed myself a cup of black coffee. I went out to the wooden balcony and sat in my rocking chair. The house was silent again. The sea hit the rocks with its usual constant rhythm. At my 62 years of age, I didn't need anyone to manage my life for me. I was in control. I had the keys, and no one would ever try to take them from me again. Sometimes we think that loving our family means always giving in, as if the passing of the years forced us to hand over control of our lives simply to not cause problems. But I learned that peace is neither begged for nor negotiated. Protecting our space, our effort, and our peace of mind is not an act of selfishness. It is pure dignity. You don't have to yell, argue, or seek revenge to set a boundary. Sometimes, the most powerful response is a clear, silent, and firm action. Our home and our autonomy belong to us until the last of our days. And, in the end, true love also consists of teaching others where their comfort ends and where our freedom begins.